I was in the waiting room of the doctor's office the other day working on my laptop, when a young girl sat down next to me and began working on one as well. Soon after, a hunched senior woman sat on the other side of the first girl. I picked up some of the complimentary coffee while they exchanged greetings, and after watching the girl on her device a brief time, the older lady said, "Oh, may I ask what you're doing on that computer there?" The girl glanced back up just long enough to reply, "Homework. I do online school." Curious, she probed again. "Oh, really? You can do that online?" The girl said, "Yeah. I have better grades than my classmates, so they told my mom I could." She checked her phone for a moment before putting it in her pocket. One or two more times, the senior tried to make small talk, to no avail. Eventually, the mom finished her appointment, took her daughter, and left. Now, if I were to ask you how old the younger girl was in this story, what age would you assume? 16? 15? 13? Nope. If it was any of those ages, I wouldn't have paid much attention. It was a 10-year-old little girl with a bright yellow polka dot shirt and oversized square glasses who'd skipped the 5th grade through online school. On one hand, I must congratulate this girl. Most never skip a grade, I certainly never did. But on the other, I lament for this girl. While I was sheltered growing up, I at least had school as a small pocket of limited social interaction in my otherwise solitary existence. I at least had a few fond memories of the recess playground that this child might not have. But this melancholy reminiscence left me wondering, why are people opting for online schools? Is it actually more effective for learning than traditional education? And how does this affect you, me, or our other younger relatives going to school? The answers to these questions tell the somewhat depressing story of how our relationship with education has fallen over the years, and what that means for society at large. The idea of online schooling first gained national prominence when it had to be adopted by schools across the country. Everyone remembers the COVID lockdowns. Theaters and restaurants closed shop, many for the last time. Offices and schools did too, many scrambling to create a framework that supports working from home. The time spent in isolation meant that when governments lifted mandates for schools, many had returned to classes for friends whom they hadn't seen since the quarantine began, though many decided to continue remote learning. For some it was quicker, or had more flexible course choices. For others it allowed for self-paced work. For the people motivated by scholastic achievement and efficiency over camaraderie, online school allowed for the perfect environment to quickly surpass their peers and fast-track their education. Why have a teacher tell me when I needed it to get done, when I could decide for myself and have it be quicker? One advocate for online school may ask. It's not like online courses were a new thing. Colleges have been offering online courses since the mid-2000s, and it's been proven to work, and many students excelled through them. In some cases, people performed even better thanks to online courses. So by the mid-2010s, there was a certain optimism towards technologies in schools. Although few had considered fully online school for anyone under college age, online courses had proved successful. And technology over the next few years became an essential asset to even the most remote schools, giving kids access to new interactive learning methods despite the trade-off of the occasional kid off task. When the lockdowns were announced, some may have viewed online schooling skeptically, but nobody could have foreseen how quickly downhill bringing online schools to elementary and high schools would go. All across the nation, the occasional kid off task became the occasional kid on task. The occasional kid skipping class became the occasional kid in class, and the occasional kid with bad grades became the occasional kid with good grades. That technology fulfilled the promise to change education forever nobody could deny, but the cost of the blind optimism nobody could forget. The reasons for the failure of online schools during the pandemic boil down to a few key factors. One of the bigger ones was the assumption that school would have or at least be able to build a sustainable infrastructure to support online schooling during the pandemic in a reasonable time frame. Many older teachers who could barely pull up a YouTube video to show the class without technical difficulties were left entirely in the dark with little, if any, instruction on how to use the new video call technology that their class was entirely dependent on. A few gave up, and instead posted recordings of lectures and assignments into the online portal, students being forced to fend for themselves. For those teachers who were younger, or at least more technologically literate, they had yet another hurdle to overcome. It became, overnight, much harder to enforce punishments. Nobody could stop someone from eating, texting, or leaving to go to the bathroom. The illusion of authority teachers held was broken, and kids openly defied them without reprimand. Teachers complained that this set a precedent that they are facing the consequences of even now. But if a teacher was able to get creative with the punishments they had, there was yet another problem to deal with. Initially, teachers struggled to structure systems of communication. On their own once more, teachers had to figure this out. They had tools to answer questions, like emails, video calls, or chat forums like in Google Classroom, but each of these had their own limitations, and figuring out how to use each one of them in an effective manner was up to the individual teacher. It was an academic Wild West, and the atmosphere of the day may be summed up as, unto each their own, as long as it is on their own. It's clear that teachers had their own fair share of problems. But despite their best efforts, no individual teacher could lift the whole weight of parents' failure and government's politics' combined burden from students, adding on to the list of new and unforeseen weights on the youth of the new generation. If a person had went into a coma in 2009 and woke up now, they would be amazed by how captivated everyone is by their small, glowing rectangles. So much so that according to a national survey, between 2010 and 2023, we went from 44.1% of people who see their friends informally nearly every day to 29.6%, and that's if we include the new category of daily. A 14.5 or 1 in 7 person decrease. Now, students were still and are still lonelier than ever before. The viral nature of and constant comparisons forced by online platforms like Instagram and TikTok certainly didn't help. Fleeting attention and insecure self-image already rocked the murky, cloudy road they were on. But blindly and fast approaching was an intersection where 3 pandemics had converged. A pandemic of global health, a pandemic of loneliness, and a pandemic of institutional failure. Social media and isolation compounded the already heavy burdens on youth mental health and social interaction. Few rise to the challenge, instead opted, understandably, to ride out the storm and do the bare minimum to get by. So when the light of society and the possibility of community loomed once again on the horizon after the long, desperate night, students jumped at the first opportunity to seize it, returning to schools they had been used to. Despite the abundance of students who'd fallen back, schools couldn't have held back the amount who needed to be in order to properly digest the material without serious political retribution. So all but the most dedicated were left trying to keep their heads above water in a sea of overwhelming unpreparedness, having missed a semester's worth of information to build upon. The idea of online school gained and maintains a negative connotation in the minds of most who are related to anybody in school during this period, be they educators, parents, or students. But schools, because of the decision to move everyone along despite high failure rates and students not having learned the curriculum of the prior year, they had to figure out a way for them to give the impression of catching up quickly without burdening students with the workload of 2 semesters at once. Here was the possibility to rebrand itself, and online schools jumped at the first opportunity to seize it. not just as a way to substitute traditional education and prove that they were once and for all more effective, but as a way to pull students up from the verge of failure and put them back on their feet. They would offer semester courses as credit recovery, pre-made courses where students would watch videos and answer multiple choice questions with quizzes that were able to justify their existence by building on data supported by a very different type of online school for college. It was mostly hands-off for teachers, so teachers wouldn't have the workload of grading 2 semesters. Yet it came at a great cost, and students were left nutrient-starved. Credit recovery courses are to in-person courses what canned meals are to sit-in restaurant meals. It is a fine substitute on paper until you look at the ingredients, or in this case, the course contents. Canned food is a superficial remake of the original meal, pumped with unnecessary filler so it can be preserved for any circumstance and cooked quickly. This works too when we consider the underlying assumption of canned food. Forget the teacher or the chef. For a standardized dish would benefit from being made into a technologically cheaper and more easily accessible automated one. So too are credit recovery courses hollowed out husks of the original. No critical thinking is required when most questions are copied verbatim from videos. Multiple choice questions with 4 answers are only marked incorrect after the second wrong answer, nearly guaranteeing success for any student who can make a reasonable inference, assuming they don't just Google the answer, which they can and often do. And for essay questions, most only have a keyword check to make sure the right terms are used. In many cases, one can get by skipping them entirely. Online courses correctly assumed that the quality of education wasn't important to those who they needed to keep selling to. They instead only showed numbers of enrollments, completion rates, and course lengths to their constituents. The politicians, the administrative bureaucrats, mouthpieces, and the pundits could all boast about how effective their philanthropic projects in education were, by spinning a distorted tale of reality, propped up by inflated statistics and misleading assumptions. A few caught on, but most were fooled. Now I will give credit where credit is due. For those who are motivated with an autodidactic bend, good online courses with support from educators and peers can supplement and build on a solid foundation. But that foundation needs to be solid, and that motivation high. Stakes need to be involved to keep students on track. Because people who put their money into the course want to succeed lest they lose it. This is why online courses work so well in the college environment. The material in the course is often not able to be completed in a few hours by even a dedicated student, unlike their primary and secondary school counterparts, whose coursework can be completed by a bored or even lazy student in that same allotted time. There's no personal or monetary investment from the high schoolers themselves, and if it comes from the parents, no, it's not quite as impactful. So they work great in post-secondary education, and have the ability to provide a meaningful education. But it doesn't work so well for anyone younger, and especially not a 10-year-old little girl with bright yellow polka dot shirt and oversized glasses. And these online schools weren't ignorant of this. Online schools wanted to expand their audience and sought new horizons anyhow. They realized after the rebrand, it became easier to fool parents in grades as early as 4th, 5th, 6th grade and younger, whose youthful innocence eclipsed the shadows cast by COVID, kids who were in the earliest years of school during it, into believing that their exceptional kid would benefit from the same tired, terrible types of courses that are sold as credit recovery to students a year older in the very next classroom. They gave a new why for opting for online school, weaving a promise of fast-tracked achievement and academic success, leaving behind the reality of inflated credentials and shallow understanding. Forgetting all the while a fundamental truth of education articulated so well by Benjamin Franklin in a quote from over 200 years ago yet one that rings true even more so today than in his own time. Tell me, and I forget. Teach me, and I may remember, but involve me, and I learn. But we don't involve kids or teachers in education anymore. We don't teach them the skills that they'll take into college or their careers, and it's hard to argue that we tell them what they should know to begin with.